Welcome to the Golden Hour, the podcast community where moms and moms-to-be hear stories from other mothers and top experts in the pregnancy and postpartum care field. You can visit goldenhour.fm for more information, resources, and all other episodes. You can also find us at goldenhour.fm on Instagram for comments and questions. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of The Golden Hour. I'm your host, Dr. O, and I'm joined today by a dear friend, Stephanie Sherwood. Stephanie is a former attorney and now currently a stay-at-home mom. She grew up in Sacramento, California, and attended Stanford University for both undergrad and law school. And she currently lives in Brooklyn, New York with her husband, Mark, and her two lovely daughters, Cora, 4, and Franny, 2. Welcome, Stephanie.
Hi, thank you for having me. This is so exciting.
How are you doing?
Doing well. I was sharing before we started recording, but just kind of tired right now because end of the school year with both girls and we're potty training our younger daughter. So it's like she is a very different being than her older sister.
Yeah. Just pile it on. Do you guys have plans for them for the summer to keep them entertained and busy?
Yes. I mean, we kind of plans for all of us to be entertained and busy. We're going to be traveling a lot. We're actually going to take them to Europe for the first time.
Ooh.
I know.
That's big.
So, I know. But the thing is, like, people are like, that's a little crazy, but we moved from California to New York. It's the same time on a plane.
Yeah.
So we were like, let's do this while we're living in New York. And then like Cora's doing some summer camps, my older daughter, but our younger daughter, Franny, she's still too young so we'll be hanging out mostly.
Yeah. But, where in Europe are you guys going?
France and Portugal.
Oh, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Do you want a third older kid? Like, do you need another daughter?
Yeah.
Because I can be
with us?
I can be your daughter.
We actually do. You know how shameless my husband, Mark, is. So typically the school Cora goes to, they offer summer camp. This summer they do not. And so he was kind of asking around. He's like, well, what are all the teachers going to do with all this time off? And they were like, well, we're actually looking for babysitting gigs. And he, without a moment pause, was like, would you be interested in traveling with her?
Yeah, that's smart. And I bet the answer is yes for several people.
I think it's a little tough. Like, I don't know, TBD. It's probably just going to be us. I think it's hard for people to like, even though it's unfortunate for them because they probably like want to have something to do over the summer, but kind of can't like pick up and relocate that easily. Yeah. Like they have their own families and stuff. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see. It's just going to be us. But if you want to come,
my husband is self-sufficient. So I can be your built-in babysitter / friend /
If you want to just come and not even be a built-in babysitter, we have the space for you. Let me know. Okay. You can do that. You can absolutely do that. Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's dive in. Speaking of being busy and the chaos that is, rearing children and potty training, let's go way, way back.
Yeah.
I think probably what Core's for. So let's think like 5+ years ago. Yeah. What were your thoughts about motherhood? Like even before you gave birth, like either in the years when you and Mark were like planning and thinking about it, or the months of your pregnancy?
Motherhood or pregnancy or what like all of it?
Yeah, all of it.
I mean, I think in a lot of ways in life, I am not I mean, you know me, and I guess like, obviously like we went to college together and my background, like in some ways I'm a very type A organized like person, but in other ways in my life, I'm a little bit more go with the flow. And I think I've become that way as I've gotten older, but for whatever reason, family planning, I've still stuck kind of to a type A personality. So for me, it was like, I knew, when we were married, I was like, I want a few years without children. I want to like get that under my belt, like have that relationship. And then I was very particular and, purposeful about when we wanted to have kids. And we were lucky and we were able to get pregnant, like kind of when I wanted to. But it's funny looking back, I guess I say, because in my mind, I was like, I'm going to just control this. And we were able to, but like typically you can't really control like when and how and in what way you become a mom. But I guess like my first thoughts of it were just sort of like when I wanted to do it and kind of like not checking off a box, but like I'm feeling ready for it, but wasn't really thinking too much about like what that would look like. Once I was pregnant, like I think I really took it like linearly. I first really only thought about like pregnancy and then really only thought about like labor, delivery. And I didn't, I think as I got further along in my pregnancy, then I thought about like, wait, what's like parenting all about? I can't say for sure, but just anecdotally speaking with friends and other women, I would say more people actually focus on parenting and becoming a mom and read a lot of like how-to parenting books before becoming a mom or a dad. That is hugely important. I probably should have done more of that. But I was one of those people that was like, I am going to figure out what it's like to have a baby inside of me and like have, deliver a baby. So I really focused on that first, I would say.
Yeah. And it sounds like you did a really good job, to be honest, of staying in the present. Like it can be so overwhelming. Like there's phase after phase after phase, but there's something really, I don't know, to me, peaceful about staying in the present if you can.
Totally. Yeah. I think, and there was, I don't know, there's just kind of like a sense to sort of like rush. I mean, we've talked about this so much, but like rush through it and like kind of hand the reins to someone else during pregnancy. So for me, I was like, I don't, I'd heard stories and just read enough that it felt like an experience that sometimes women feel it's happening to them rather than an experience they're owning. And so before I even like touched motherhood or parenthood, like once I knew I wanted to have children, I was like, I need to figure out like what it's like to become pregnant and have a baby. And that's really what I focused on.
Was there anything that you thought was going to be really hard about, again, the entire, spectrum of getting pregnant, being pregnant, and then, postpartum and motherhood? Anything that you thought in advance you were concerned about?
I mean, so I would say to answer that like succinctly, pregnancy, it felt like everybody was like, this is so hard. And everyone talked about delivery as like, this is so hard. And I kind of tackled that of like, I want to dispel that myth because it can't be that hard. I think with motherhood and being a mom, I had kind of the opposite reaction. And I can do this. Sometimes I was like, I'm going to prepare myself for the worst because it seems like it's going to be crazy, crazy hard. And so that one, like, I'm going to take at face value. Like being a mom, that's really hard. And I think I like overly prepared myself for it so that when I did have my first daughter, I was like, okay, this isn't that crazy. It's crazy hard, but like, I think I had prepared myself for like the extreme challenges of it.
Can you reflect on why you were so intent on trying to demystify this like sense of, pregnancy is going to be really hard. Oh, birth is going to be so hard. Why was that so important for you?
It just didn't seem right. Like it was from reading accounts, but honestly, mostly just like talking to women, like women older than me and friends, not family so much. Cause I was kind of one of the first, like I only have 2 older brothers and then like cousins who have had children subsequently, but like mostly like older girlfriends who had already had kids. And above and beyond like the phrases that I would get after having birth or like, of their birth stories were like, that was horrible. I didn't expect this. And this happened, like, like physical trauma, even, the worst case scenario being like, I'm dealing with like PTSD from that. And it wasn't even necessarily anything so crazy had happened in their labors. Sometimes, yes, but more so it was like, I think it felt to me that they had gone in unintentionally, but just like unprepared for like what could happen. And like, they didn't, and then they went through this quite transformative experience and they were still dealing with this afterwards of like, how do I even process that? So for me, I'm like a big researcher. I was as a lawyer. And like, so I'm like, I'm just going to read everything and kind of, see what this is all about, because that sounds so scary to me. Like, I've never had surgery. I've never done anything like so transformative to my own body. So this was going to be like the biggest time in my life where I ever had an experience like that, groundbreaking for me personally. So for me, knowing that, I was like, it just seems like common sense that I would prepare myself, like learn about this, And so I don't think I went in with like necessarily trying to demystify the negative stories. It was more just like people seemed unprepared or kind of shocked by their experience. So I was like, well, let me like, what is birth then? Just like, I don't know anything. I don't really, I don't know. Like no one really talks about it in that way. Like people don't typically like read birth stories or listen to them. So I was like, well, they're obviously out there. And I just kind of like set out to find them. And so I listened to a ton of birth stories. I read a bunch of birth stories. I read like a ton of books preparing myself for it. And people talk about this all the time, particularly those who have unmedicated births or at-home births, but Ina May's, the midwife kind of like Bible, if you will, for birth, for different births. But it's really just like 1,000-page book of birth stories. And so something like that was super helpful for me, where I just started reading different accounts, and it gave me the ability to kind of, I'd only had a few examples from my friends of like some negative, some positive, but it was just a handful. And all of a sudden now, like just building up data, again, my researcher mind, I was like, okay, here's 1,000 more stories. And I started to see like birth could be a lot of different things. And it started to prepare me better of like, okay, it doesn't have to be bad. It doesn't have to be negative. It doesn't have to be painful. It doesn't have to be something that is going to happen to me. You know, it could be all those things, but it could be a lot of other things too. And then once I got started, I couldn't stop. And I basically just spent the next nearly 10 months, because I was pregnant for a very long time.
You were
almost 42 weeks, reading. And so I read just so many different birth stories. I read a lot of books that women had recommended to me, but I kind of like really took to heart. Like I read Expecting Better by, what is her name? I'm like blanking on everything, but I started to listen to the Birth Hour, which is just birth stories. Evidence-Based Birth is a great like database online. I read everything on there. And so then it became an experience of not just like garnering more stories, but demystifying some of the things that I had kind of just come to assume or heard. And I started to form my own, like, not opinion, but like, and not plan, because you can't really control your pregnancy and you can't really control your birth. But I was like, taught me how to like make decisions where I could and like what I wanted to do ultimately.
I mean, you've said so many things that I want to glom on. One of the general theme I'm getting is just empowering yourself. I think so much for me as a clinician and someone who's had the honor of caring for so many birthing people it is so scary. Like being in the birthing scenario for me is very different because that's my work. But when you've never had any interaction with healthcare, if you're fortunately healthy and you've never had surgeries before or been in a hospital before, it can feel so overwhelming. And so much of why I'm even having this conversation with you and doing this podcast is because I want women to feel empowered by hearing stories like your own. I love that you on your own accord, once a nerd, always a nerd, you decided to like go deep in doing that research.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Even if I hadn't been pregnant, I was like, this is fascinating. But yeah, to your point, I think I was surprised that fewer women, and we've talked about this, like I come from a place of extreme privilege to have been able to like be given the time and ability to educate myself on this, and then like have a voice in which I felt like confident enough to like share my findings and demand the sort of like care I wanted. But many of my peers are in that same place. And we've talked about this. Like, I'm always surprised more people don't have the same reaction as me. You know, the information is out there, but kind of people, I don't know, there seems to be like a little bit of like, this is the way it's done. I'm just going to like kind of hand my body and care off and like let, you know, and not that it's being mishandled. I never thought that. It was more just like, don't you want to, you know, if you were going in to get like a hip replacement, you would research the best person to do it and try to understand like, what is that going to be like before, during, after. And I just think that I was always surprised by it. Just felt like there weren't as many women who were doing that when they were encountering birth and pregnancy. And, you know, and I can't say that for sure, but I got the sense of it when they were like, whoa, I didn't know postpartum would be like this, or like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that's how it went down in the hospital. And, you know, so yeah, I just came from that place of like, the information is out there. I'm going to find it to figure out what it's going to be like for me. And once I started to do that, then I started to form my own opinions about how I wanted to be pregnant, how I wanted to deliver, and whatnot.
Yeah, no. So that's a perfect segue to my next question. I think I know the answer. The question was if you felt prepared for your labor experience before you gave birth. It sounds like you were incredibly prepared.
Yes.
You named some general resources. So you mentioned Ida Mae's like kind of manifesto, if you will.
Yes.
You mentioned Expecting Better.
Yeah.
Any other resources that you sought out, and how did you find them? Was it just Google? Was it talking to friends?
So the Birth Hour is another podcast that I highly recommend. And I listen to that, and every speaker on their podcast, like lists out the resources that they used, and they talk about it, and then also listed in the show notes after. And I got a lot of resources that way. Beyond that though, I think Googling, talking to, I think I got a few recs from friends. Evidence-Based Birth was one that you didn't just mention now, but that one also lists a lot of resources. It's just like a massive database. It's Rebecca Decker. Now I'm remembering.
Oh yeah, that's the same author.
Yes. She covers every topic. Another book, I'm forgetting the author I read. I think it's called Natural Hospital Birth. I don't love that term natural because all births are natural, but it's basically having an unmedicated hospital birth. And that was as I delved into the research for my first pregnancy, that became my goal of having an unmedicated hospital birth for a variety of reasons. But
yeah. Let's go there next. Tell me about your labor experience with Cora.
Yeah. So Cora, I had very lucky with both girls, or both pregnancies, like straightforward kind of textbook, uncomplicated pregnancies. I don't think I had any issues in either of them. Knock on wood. I think I got slightly anemic in the third trimester, which is pretty common, but I think that was the only thing that I had. And I say that because I knew that from the research I had done, I was like, I am a candidate for having an unmedicated hospital birth because there isn't going to be like a kind of triage or watch on me. Like I'd had a pretty, I should have a pretty straightforward birth. Obviously anything can happen, but I felt good going into it. But I do, and my mom was like this, and I've always wondered if it's hereditary. I carried both girls past 41 weeks. Cora, I was close to 42 weeks, and Franny was just over 41 weeks. So Cora, my first, I was nearing 42 weeks, and that was like a big no-no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How were those conversations with your OB at the time?
So she was great. I mean, so my OB, it was Tunde, right?
Oh, Tushani.
I'm thinking.
Yes.
Okay. Tushani, I don't know if she's still at UCSF, but
she is.
She's wonderful and very understanding. And she was an excellent OB. She was nowhere near me when Cora was actually born, but every appointment leading up to it, Tushani was my doctor. And she knew that I think we were talking about that I wanted an unmedicated hospital birth. So I was very opposed to being induced and wanted to go as long as I could. And I don't remember any sort of negative reaction to that. She just kind of from the start was very straightforward of starting at 40 weeks, we'll want to do stress testing, which is what happens with at-home births also. So you're checking up on things. But yeah, it happened. I got to 40 weeks. I did stress testing. I think you'll know this better than me, but I think that day, and then maybe in the next 2 or 3 days later, and then by 41 weeks, it's every day.
Oh, wow. They do it even more frequently than us.
Yes. Yeah. And up until then, we'd always talked about it as you technically can go to 42 weeks, but after that we have to induce. But once I hit 41, they were like, we may have been saying that, but we don't want you to go to 42 weeks. Then it became abundantly clear that they were like, wait, you've already made it to 41. We're inducing you. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I was induced at 41 weeks and 3 days. And how that happened was I went in for one of my stress tests. Am I saying that right? That's what it's called, right? Yeah. And so I forget, they monitor you basically. You sit down and they monitor baby's heart rate for maybe, I don't know, a few minutes. And up until then, everything had looked fine. But on that day, that was December 23rd, 2019, they saw some decelerations. And they were very upfront with this. They were like, had this been 2 weeks ago, we probably, we'd be come back in, we'll check it later. But because you've already progressed so far, this makes us nervous. And so they asked me to go up to labor and delivery, where I was admitted into a pre-labor room, and they wanted to monitor me further. Having done some reading myself, I knew that being stationary was not going to help at all. So I did some laps. I walked around, got my body moving to see if I could help out baby. But then they had me lie down, hooked me up to the monitor. They monitored me for at least 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I wasn't
right.
Yeah. And I mean, on one hand, I understand the importance of it. Something could be wrong. On the other, I was getting slightly frustrated because from the reading I had done, it's my understanding that lying stationary, at that stage in pregnancy could, it's not ideal for baby in terms of heart decels. Of course, we want to monitor for safety. But on the other hand, I was like, you guys are just having me lie here. I haven't eaten in 4 hours. And you're, I know you're trying to check on me, but it also doesn't seem like the best way to check on me because, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, this is how sometimes interventions are made, perhaps more than they need to be because they've been over monitoring a stationary woman at that stage in her pregnancy. So like I came in with my own like arsenal of knowledge of being like, yeah, this isn't the best way to check up on me. And they were like, oh geez, who are we dealing with? But they did. And this was funny too. So I'm at UCSF. I'm like, they're monitoring me for a couple hours. And I had a host of people come in because they were kind of like, she doesn't want to be induced yet. We haven't scheduled her induction, but we're seeing these D cells. And it was funny. There was like, you could tell like, this was like a great example of like, birth is not like textbook. Like it's, you know, you can't really predict an outcome. You don't always know the reason why something is happening. And there are differing opinions on everything. So even at UCSF in this hospital, let's say at least 5 different doctors saw me. One was like, wait, how far along is she? Induce her right now. Another was like, well, we could wait a bit and see, like maybe have her come back tomorrow. You know, I think it was a nurse practitioner midwife who was like, is she scheduled already for like 2 days from now? It's fine for her to come in later. There was such differing opinions that, you know, it gives you, you know, I felt like empowered because I had gone in and had like information and I felt prepared to make a decision. But, you know, I'm sitting there and I'm like, gosh, if somebody who had no idea like what's going on and like why they're even checking up on like baby and like, you know, how far along somebody should go in their pregnancy, et cetera, I think they would be freaked out and just be like, tell me what to do and I'll do it.
That's such a good example of, I often say that medicine is not so much a science as it is an art. Like I will give different recommendations from my colleague and the colleague after that. And everyone obviously is well-intentioned.
Totally.
But there's something to be said about, again, coming into the situation empowered and having your sense of things.
And it's hard though. And I mean, it's wanting to be empowered, but also just like coming in and seeing like, if there's, you know, in this one room alone, there's 3 different opinions on how this could go. Obviously, like they don't really know. And they can't really know. And so like, you know, you can make like the safest decision, the least risk, you know, most risk averse decision, or you can make a decision that you feel most comfortable with. There's so many different factors. And so that's why I think, you know, coming in with like knowledge and being empowered to make your own decisions was super helpful. So, I mean, they were helpful. Fortunately, we finally like stuck it out long enough. I can't remember the doctor's name, but I'm so happy. Like she was like, I think pretty senior. And we talked about this and I forget her name, but I appreciate it because she like kind of came in and I'd gotten all these opinions and she was like, this is how I see it. Technically, like, yes, we're probably most worried because you're this far along. If you had been earlier on in your pregnancy, we'd probably let you go home. That being said, you're going to be induced in a couple of days anyway. Like we see enough right now that it does make me nervous. We're not going to make you stay, but we're going to start inducing you like tomorrow morning. We negotiated with her to let me do the Foley balloon at home that night.
Yeah.
Which That's usually you have to do the Foley balloon in the hospital starting in the morning as the first step because they want to understandably like monitor it. But I think they felt comfortable enough that they were like, okay, we're going to put the Foley balloon in you as long as you come in tomorrow and we can check progress then and start the rest of the induction at that point. So that's so I was like, that sounds good. I'll do it. So they like checked my cervix, did a membrane sweep, gave me the Foley balloon and sent me on my way. And so I got to go home, sort of sleep, but like not really because, you know, labor had started at that point. Kind of. And then I came back the next morning. The Foley balloon had worked. I was 4 centimeters dilated. I had to wait a few hours for my room to be ready. So I was like, okay. So once my room was ready, then we got started. And that was closer to noon on December 24th. And
she was born on the 25th, right?
But at midnight. So I was
like literally right at midnight.
Yeah. So other than the Foley balloon, which like did have some like irregular contraction, like I started to feel birth, you know, I was dilating. I went from 0 to 4 centimeters, basically. Really, I was in the hospital in active labor, like 12 to 12. And things didn't even really ramp up until probably 4 p.m. So yeah, I got into the hospital, started at noon. I had Mark, too bad he's not here. He would tell me exactly, but I had a few rounds of misoprostol.
Okay.
That like kicked me into gear. The first couple hours I was like fine, but by like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, I was like, okay, I'm in labor. And this is where things got interesting from like my perspective and where I really felt happy that I had done the research and been empowered to make my decisions. Because as I'm sure you know, you, an OB, you worked at UCSF, like they, I think, looked at me as a patient, as somebody, you've come in for an induction. You clearly need help having this baby. So we're going to offer you strongly the things that we think you're going to need. So I'd only had misoprostol. I was handling labor well, and they came in around sometime in the afternoon. They were like, you're going to need more than this, like to have this baby. And I was like, I don't think so. I'm really trying to do this unmedicated. So I don't want to have Pitocin because I'm not going to take an epidural. I don't want anything else. And they're like, if you don't have Pitocin, you're probably not going to have this baby for like a couple days. And that's just not good. Like, you're not in active enough labor. And I was like, I can tell you, I am in active labor right now. And like, there was this moment where it was like, I'm the one having the baby. Like, why do you not believe me? And again, I don't think it's like they don't believe me, but I'm a woman who went 41 and a half weeks without any signs of labor before that. From their perspective, they're like, we've seen this so many times. Like, you're going to need more than that to have this baby. And I was like, yeah, but you're not in my body right now. I'm in labor. And within a couple hours, I was like in the bathtub, like working through labor. And they were still like, at that point, there was like a rotation of the teaching team. And they're like, you're going to need something else. We should hook you up to the Pitocin. And Mark was like, how about you just give us 1 other hour and come check on us then? Like, just give us a little more time. And basically, he just kept pushing them off. He was even, he had pulled up studies that we had looked at beforehand, because I guess it is more common. You probably know this. In European countries and maybe elsewhere, misoprostol is commonly used without Pitocin. Pitocin is much more prevalent. It's much more prevalent in inductions in the United States. I didn't know that. But Mark had all the data where he was like, look, here's how many births, where inductions are successful without introducing any intravenous drugs, like misoprostol, and others have handled it fine. And they were like, okay, whatever. Like, we'll give you an hour. And by the time they came back, I was like really in it. And they were like, it's still not going to happen though for like 36 hours or something. They said
Had they checked your cervix at that point?
I said I didn't want any cervix checks. I was like, I don't want to be informed of the progress. I just want to I'm in this. And they were like, it's not going to come anytime soon. And then my water broke like 20 minutes later. And then the nurse was like, oh my God. Oh, she was like, you were right. Okay. And like things like kicked into gear. And like, I was just like, that was probably like 9 to like midnight or so. And then around midnight, I think I went through transition. I started to feel like I was ready to push. And the midwife was Melinda. Yeah. It was hilarious. She came in and she was like, there's absolutely like 0 chance you're ready to push. And I was like, I'm telling you, I am ready to push. And she was like, well, this has happened fast. And she was like, well, how far along is she? Has anyone checked her? And they were like, she didn't want any checks. And she's like, she's looking at me like I'm crazy. I'm looking at her like she's crazy. She checks me and she's like, oh, yep, you're 10 centimeters. We're ready to go. And I was like, and there's like this moment of clarity after you've gone through that period. So like, you kind of like, you're sort of like out of mind, out of body experience. But then when you get to the part where you're ready to push, I don't know. I'm sure other women have shared this. You're like, you kind of can like hold a conversation all of a sudden again. And so I looked at her and I was like, how do I do that? And she was like, oh, now you want us to tell you what to do.
That's so Melinda.
Yeah. And then we're like bantering. So that gives you an idea. Like, it's so interesting, the like phases of birth. Like, you really, when you're going through that transition, it felt like I was watching my body. And then once I hit 10 centimeters, I was like back in it and I could like joke. It's really interesting. But that was around midnight. I pushed for like 30 minutes and she was born at 12:39 a.m. Christmas Day.
Yeah. We talked about how you're a type A, and I think in general, at least in the Bay Area, probably similar in New York, there's a lot of type A'ers, myself included. And there is this sense going into pregnancy, birth, even postpartum, feeling like there's a plan and I want to keep to that plan. There's a privilege to be able to keep that plan, but I always also just recognize that sometimes things can't go according to plan. Like, really, in truth, like when it comes to things that are not happening to your body, I also appreciate you saying that, but happening like with your body, sometimes things can occur unexpectedly. Do you overall feel like you got what you wanted? And I'm putting that in quotes. Like, do you feel like that was a birth experience, at least a hospital birth experience that you wanted?
Yes, 1,000%. With like 2 caveats, and it worked out. Though I think I was so afraid of an induction because I knew from the reading I had done, like, that's when you start to lose control. And I did see that once I got into the hospital. They were like, you have to do this, you have to take this. And I did, because of the induction, I feel like I had to like push for my rights a little bit more. They were like, you need to have Pitocin. And I was like, no, I don't. And they're like, you're going to want an epidural. And I'm like, I don't want one. And they were like, I was like, I want to be able to walk through this pregnancy. I want to be able to move around. You guys can continue to monitor me, but like, I'm going to be moving. So like, good luck. Like, and I think an induction, it takes away to that because you're on, understandably, like you've been given like drugs and enhancements and like, they have to monitor it more closely. And so I was very nervous about an induction. I felt like I already had to like kind of let go of my plan, but through it, I kept trying to like be like, okay, yes, I have to have this. Yes, I agree to the induction now. But like, because I had information with me, I could kind of negotiate or ask for what I wanted and be like, let me take the Foley balloon home. Why not? And then they were like, all right, sure. I think a lot of women like probably don't even know what a Foley balloon is until they're like presented with the opportunity to have one. So I think it was helpful for me to have been empowered with that because I could kind of roll with plans changing. And then because of that, I think I had the birth that I very much wanted. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And spoiler alert, I obviously know how Franny came into the world and we're going to spend the second half of this episode talking more about that. But thinking back to you and Mark's decision to have a natural hospital birth, so an unmedicated hospital birth. Yeah. When you were pregnant with Cora, did you guys contemplate birthing elsewhere, either at like a low risk birth center or even a home birth? What was that conversation like with your pregnancy with Cora?
So I went into it like at the very start, like it's like I had all this information and drilled down. And by the end, like, I was over 30 weeks pregnant. That at that point I was like, I have learned so much. And I like my ideal birth probably would be at home. But because this is my first pregnancy and first time, like, I don't know what it's going to be like. Every woman is different. Like I had to prepare a lot mentally, like emotionally to like do an unmedicated birth because it's not a walk in the park. And Mark and I both felt like it would be more prudent to do that in a hospital setting because I didn't know how I would handle it. And like, there's a lot of, what if I needed additional support? Not necessarily in the form of like an epidural, but more just like, so much of birth, especially birthing unmedicated, is like not getting in your own head and letting it progress. And I just didn't know how I was going to handle that. So even though I like kind of as I got closer to the birth, thought maybe I would love to do this at home, I was like, okay, let's do this first one in the hospital and let's see if I can do it the way I want to do it and then make a decision later down the line about doing it somewhere else. And I was really happy with like delivering at UCSF, although it's like a teaching hospital and there's a lot of people in the room. It's we had to kind of like fight for what we want, but they were listening to us. Like it's very patient centric. They let you, I felt like I didn't need to, and I was so lucky, but they'll let you labor a long time. Like they will, it does feel like they have as any hospital does, but really like mom's interest at heart of like, what is she, And so I was happy with my decision to have Cora there.
A patient-centered birth experience should be the gold standard. Sadly, not everywhere that's done, but I don't know. I'm biased because I've only trained and practiced in California, but I do think it's a California way. I think that's what our expectation is. Yeah.
I mean, the Bay Area, I think we're lucky. I'm privileged to have lived among like coastal, educated, empowering cities. And I hear stories and read enough to know that I'm worried about hospitals that are, I don't know, like elsewhere, or like birthing, like, women have to really, like, I don't know, you probably know the data on this better than me. I haven't looked recently. I always research as I'm pregnant again, and I'm not pregnant right now, so I haven't. But like the U.S. mortality rate for birthing moms is not great, right? Among developed countries. Yeah. So like,
it's horrible. And it's worse, sadly, amongst Black women. Yeah. So, and educated Black women at that. So
I don't doubt it. I was just,
I think what a lot of patients come into pregnancy when the first appointments that I have, whether it's women of color who seek me out intentionally or women in general, is like, how do I go through this experience without like fear? And some of it is really just acknowledging that like your body was meant for this. Like I always tell people that, like I said, I'm an obstetrician and I trained for this, and it's an honor to be able to deal with emergencies. But in truth, for hundreds of years before obstetrics, people were still birthing. The mortality rates were significantly higher. Let's not minimize that. Right. But the body can still do it. But there is like that delicate line of kind of empowering patients and believing and supporting their bodies, but also understanding, again, for me, I always say I'm an OB/GYN doctor who's trained by midwives. The midwives that you've mentioned so far in your care were the ones who trained me. Midwives are experts in natural and normal birth. I believe in natural normal birth, but also understanding that there's just times when we're needed. And I think for whatever reason you and Mark made the decision to birth at UCSF for the first pregnancy, you probably had it in the back of your mind that, hey, if an emergency happens, because I don't know what my body will do in this pregnancy, maybe a hospital is a good place.
I think it's called Natural Hospital Birth. I'll give you the name of the book, but it's kind of in line with what we were thinking at that point. It's like, in the event of emergency, I don't know what my body will do, or just like, you know, the book opens with like, you want to have an unmedicated birth in like kind of, for me at that stage in my life, it was sort of like, I felt most comfortable in a hospital, like, because I didn't have to worry about it. Then after having gone through it, baby number 2, I was like, now I think I will be most comfortable in a different setting.
Really quick, before we talk more about the second, aka home birth, how did you mentioned there was a lot of prep that goes into unmedicated births. And I talked to my patients, again, it's, you know, those first couple appointments, even though someone's only like 10 weeks, they're already really thinking about several months later of, okay, but I want an unmedicated birth. What do I do? Yeah. And so and I always tell them, you have to be really prepared and intentional. It's like, it's training for something incredibly mentally, physically, spiritually intense. It sounds like reading the book was a resource for you. Any other prep work that you did?
There are a lot of women with unmedicated births do like prepare on, I'm sure you've heard of it, hypnobirthing.
Did you end up doing that?
I did not. I didn't even really look into it. I was kind of like, maybe kid number 3, I'll look into that. But like each birth has been like a new thing. Like the first one, unmedicated. The second one at home. Maybe the third one will be like hypnobirthing in a bathtub. I don't know. But I'm not a naturally like meditative person. So for me, I was like, I don't think I'll be able to do hypnobirthing. So I didn't even go there. A big part of why I wanted to have an unmedicated birth was after having read Expecting Better, and like she lays out all the data, and she's like, basically like, and she has an unmedicated birth in a hospital because, you know, she looking at all the data, she's like, you know, best chance of like 0 tearing, best chance of like recovery after, all these things that I was like, that sounds great. I want that. And then also knowing my body, I was like, we're all different. For some people, they're like, I just can't imagine that level of intensity, or if you want to say pain. So like, I would rather have the epidural and that will like calm me in that way. For me, I was like, I can't imagine not being able to like eat or walk or move. Like I'm a pretty athletic physical person. So I was like, moments of discomfort, I'm going to want to just like control my own body. And that helped. So like for me, a lot of the preparation, it was reading birth stories and hearing like what other women had done. And then kind of just like practicing like what I would do with like moments of intensity and pain, and like how to like sit with that, both just like in my head and like feel it. Also just like get into like comfortable positions and know that that was like kind of the best for like me in the long run, and like why I had made that decision to begin with, of like why I wanted an unmedicated birth. Yeah, I think those things, like they helped like kind of get me to where I needed to be. But it is very like an in the mind, like it's hard to explain. But I think a lot of people are like, why would you do that? It's crazy. And it's like, I've never done this, but running a marathon is super hard and challenging and physically like crazy. And it's kind of the same thing. Like that doesn't mean you don't run the marathon, and you're not going to like take like, you know, you're going to feel your muscles burn through this. And it's the same with birth. Like there was something kind of amazing in being able to like feel it, but it is intense.
That's beautiful. Let's talk about Franny. Tell me more about your decision to do a home birth the second time around.
Okay. So like, I mean, I was pretty set on it, but I am always like, I'm methodical, well-researched, and like want to be prepared in this. So I knew that I only wanted to do it. And by the way, like midwives, I think certainly the midwives I encountered in the Bay Area, and I think most places, they're only going to take you on as a client if you have like 0 risk factors. So I engaged midwives early on because you really have to. They book up very quickly. They only take a handful of clients. So I engaged them early on, but I continued to go to UCSF up through like 20 to 22 weeks. Obviously, my midwives would have like sent me out to do like testing necessary, all the same stuff. But I was just kind of curious to get like both perspectives all the way, like halfway through at least. So I still got the OBGYN experience along with my midwives for the first half. I think I just wanted to go through every step of the way and make sure like, everything looks good. Everything is like you're on track to be able to do this. And so I guess I went into it, you know, being like, I'm pretty positive I'm doing an at-home birth, but I'm going to make sure everything is okay before I'm like fully committed. but yeah, I think I felt like I had like a pretty straightforward birth with Cora, minus having to be inducted. So I felt like I was a good candidate to have an at-home birth for my second. And that kind of played into the decision. And it was like a chance, like I had the birth I wanted at the hospital, but I did have to advocate for myself more. And I was like, I wonder what it would be like to just kind of like have the experience with people who are like totally on the same page as me. Like there's no other options here, like there's no question of Pitocin or epidural. Like, it's just like, we're having a baby.
Here we are. So I'd like to take a moment to tell you this is my passion project based on years of experience as an OB/GYN doctor. I aim to empower moms and moms-to-be and those in the pregnancy and postpartum care space. If you appreciate what I do, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share with your friends so we can reach more people like you. You can visit goldenhour.fm for more information, resources, and all other episodes. If you have any requests, suggestions, or questions for future episodes, please email me at hello@goldenhour.fm or leave us a comment at goldenhour.fm on Instagram. You did such a great degree of research preparing for your pregnancy with Cora. Did a lot of that research carry over to the home birth, or did you find that when you were preparing or newly pregnant with Franny that you like started doing home birth specific research?
I don't think so. I think, no, it does. I think for the most part, the research carried over because like with Cora, like the stories I like glommed onto, like the everything that like kind of I anchored in were unmedicated births anyway. I think the only thing that I did was like went back and read those resources, particularly Ida May's, and then listened to the birth stories again from the podcast and focused on at-home births. And I was just like, I just want to hear a million of like at-home births. Like, what is that like when it goes smoothly, when it doesn't go smoothly, when it goes fast, when it goes long? Like, I want to hear it all. And that's, So mostly carried over, but I really focused on like, I wanted to be able to have Franny at home. And so I was like, I want to hear all of those stories. Yeah. And
it sounded like you said you engaged with the at-home birth midwives really early on. How did you select your team? Like, was it based on availability? Was it based on
both?
Word of mouth?
I had an incredible doula my first pregnancy, Peta Barrett. She's now on the East Coast. She was training to become a midwife when she was my doula. So she wasn't in California, nor was she yet a midwife. So I knew she would not deliver my baby, but I basically reached out to her and asked her like who she had at-home births. So she had delivered both of her sons at home in the Bay Area. And I was like, who are your midwives or who do you recommend? And she was like, this is who delivered my children. She's amazing. But also this is who I've been training with. They're amazing. So I reached out to both of those teams and selected kind of based on availability and like personality match and fit.
That makes sense. What were your feelings going into the home birth? Like, what were you most excited about?
I think like the care leading up to it honestly got me really excited. I don't know if you've spoken to anyone else like who's had an at-home birth or heard this, but I'm sure you're familiar. Like obviously going to UCSF or going to you're a wonderful doctor. And like in the fact that you're doing this, clearly you are a patient-centric person and like you put all of your time into that. But we've talked about this. You have other tasks that you have to focus on. And like, I have no idea how many clients or patients you have, but like probably a million. Midwives have the luxury of having like 12. So I had probably 2 to 3 times as many appointments as I did as in the hospital setting. And each one of my appointments leading up to my birth was an hour at least. Like the amount that these women like got to know me, know my like fears and goals and aspirations and medical background, like it's unparalleled. It was amazing.
Yeah.
So like that whole experience, I was like, and of course I'm like so privileged. I'm so, like I wish everybody could have this experience. I wish healthcare were different in that, like you got this experience.
I wish I could give that experience.
Yes. Everybody should. And I felt so lucky, but I think like that care was like, okay, this is amazing. They know everything about me. And like, I know who's going to deliver my baby, like the exact person who's going to deliver my baby. And like, they met Cora, they met Mark, like they hung out at our house like 2 times before they came for the delivery. So I think I was just like excited to be able to like deliver with within a setting and with people like that. And I know that I'm just like extraordinarily lucky to have been able to do that. I was really excited about that. I think I was very nervous though. And this is funny and only like moms will get this, like I think a second kid is always nerve wracking because you're like, what about the first? Your first, and Cora's a COVID baby. Like we had never left her. She'd hardly been with a babysitter. Whether you're having a birth in a hospital or at home, I think moms are like that they don't go into labor until they know their older child is okay. And that definitely happened with me. And I've heard that time and time again, like labor kicks in once it's like grandparents are in town to like watch the kid or like the kid has gone to bed, yada, yada. But like, so I was very excited. I was very prepared for my home birth, but also super nervous the whole time of like, what are we going to do if Cora's around? And I remember asking friends asking me, they're like, what are you going to do with Cora? And we have like childcare in place-ish, but I was so confident. I was like, there's just zero chance I'm going to have this second kid until she's asleep in her bed. I was like, I guarantee it's going to happen in the middle of the night. Most births happen in the middle of the night. Like the data is there, especially particularly unmedicated births. That's when a woman's body kicks into gear for all these reasons we're talking about. Like, she's relaxed, she's ready. Like labor, you want to go into yourself. You don't want to be in a public setting. So I was like, I'm definitely doing this at night when Cora's asleep. Friends and family were like, it's like a risky gamble you're taking. But like, because that was my plan. I was like, no, I'm just going to do it when she's asleep.
Yeah.
And that is what happened. So yeah.
Yeah. Besides being, anxious about like where and when Cora would be, anything else that you were fearful of?
Not really. I know, like, I think other people will be like, that's shocking. Like it's birth, like, and you're doing it at home. For me, it's like, I remembered my birth with Cora and like what made me comfortable and confident and like ability to move through it. And like, I was like, all of those things will be better at home. Like I'm going to be in a place that's comfortable. I'm going to be in my own bathroom, my own bed. Like I remember with Cora, like I labored in UCSF, like sitting on the toilet for like 2 hours. Cause like, I mean, that's just like, what is going on? And like, and I was like, you know what? It's going to feel a hell of a lot better in my own bathroom. And it did. Like, I just like, so like I really was mostly like excited about that and like feeling like it would run smoother. Of course, people constantly were like, oh, do you have like the hospital? Most people were naysayers. I got to say it, Anna, like, and particularly men, they would be like, Mark, do you? Yeah. Like all of my friends, partners, they'd be like, do you have the ambulance at the ready? Like, are you, do you have the route to the hospital planned? And like, I get it, of course, like, but it's just, I don't know. I get so frustrated because it's coming from such an extreme place of ignorance. Like, to your point earlier, of course, there were way more instances of mother mortality, like back in the days, but for a straightforward, zero risk, no complications birth, like your body knows what it's going to do. And like, I'm an educated person. I had done the background research and it was just kind of like offensive sometimes when people were like, well, do you have plans in place for when this goes wrong? And I'm like, if we thought that the likelihood of this was going to go wrong, we wouldn't be doing it. Like, like have a little faith in our decision making here.
You are my favorite example of, obviously in our realm of people in obstetrics, whether it's my midwife colleagues or other OB/GYN doctors, we talk about home births and and I will acknowledge I'm very biased because I am an obstetrician. I'm a doctor. I work in a hospital. Yeah. But that being said, I do think that you are my favorite example of like having the first birth and seeing how your first birth went to inform the second one, right? Yeah. Like I often say like, if your first birth is really straightforward and you don't have a complication that we know is likely going to repeat itself the next time around, heck yeah, right? Yeah. Like your informed decision making is the only thing you can do, the best thing you can do in medicine. And so if a patient or a client is empowered to make the decision that feels best for them, our best thing to do then is to support that.
Yeah. And I would add my midwives, although biased in the totally different direction, they arrive at the same result. Like I am their favorite, not me personally, but like my profile is their favorite type of client. Like a second time birth, like knows what they're going through. Like, obviously they take women who are birthing for the first time at home, but it's more preparation. It's like, we have to make sure you're ready for this. And for me, it's like an exciting client because it's like, you've done this, you know what you're getting into. Like, we know that you can do it.
Yeah. Speaking of preparation, anything that you did specifically to prepare for the home birth?
Yeah. So I would say like mostly home birth is like, for me at least, and like how it is, it was like so much easier. I didn't have to go. I didn't have to come home, but there was an additional work of sort of like, and midwives make this so easy, but it was kind of funny. It was basically like all that like birth material, you know, like stuff you need, like gloves, like everything. They're like, here is the cart. Make sure you select everything, order it, and have it delivered to your house, which is like kind of funny, but like, and they come and do it all, but they're like checking all the stuff, and like they have their own like birth kit. And we explain this to like anybody who will ask. I had the exact same birth at home as I did in the hospital in terms of like what medical equipment was available to me and that I needed. Because I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but when Franny was born, they were a little nervous and wanted to give her some oxygen. And they did it in the exact same way that would have been done in the hospital. The only thing that differed was per their guidance and my own research, and had the same guidance that I received when I delivered in the hospital, basically saying we were all on the same page. I did take Pitocin after having both of my babies in order to expel my placenta.
Yeah.
Which I highly support that. It, reduces the chances of placental abruption and hemorrhage greatly. Yeah. And the only difference at home is that it's a shot versus intravenously. Yeah. The midwives. So in terms of extra work I had to do, no, it was more just like making sure all the material was at my house versus like in a hospital setting, which is kind of funny. You know what I mean? Like they were ready.
It's just like a big Amazon order and it just like showed up in a couple boxes.
There's like a special like
medical supply.
birthmoonbelly.com. I don't know.
Oh.
And stuff for like on these sites, you can like order a special like bathtub if you want, like a blow up one. I just used my own bathtub. I didn't get any like additional stuff there. Yeah. I mean, I can run you through like the actual like birth story if you want. It's much more.
Well, no,
okay.
We're going to get there. Oh, don't worry. Don't you worry. We're going to get there.
It's literally like so fast, but she came
so
back.
Fast. Yeah. But still because you were at home.
No,
I mean, that's just your body felt safe.
Well,
How did you prepare specifically like your husband or your family for the experience? Was Mark just like along for the ride, or like did you have to do any like prep with them?
Yeah. Mark was along for the ride. But I mean, I think because like everything that I researched the first time around for Cora, I like made him read. I was like, you have to like absorb this too. Cause like, I mean, and he didn't to the same extent. He doesn't know as much as I do, but he knew enough. And I made him read. There's a really good book for partners. I'll try to remember it, but he read that. He came to birthing classes with me. And so I think with that wealth of knowledge, and after having been at the birth with Cora, obviously, he was basically like my doula number 2 at Cora's birth.
I actually, if I can interrupt, I actually didn't even think you had a doula because of how involved Mark sounded. I was like, Mark was her doula. Like, why should I even ask if she had a doula? I was surprised if I had a doula.
Backstory there, because Cora was born on Christmas and our doula has 2 little kids. Like we were basically like, we were talking to her on Christmas Eve and she was like, I will come right away. And we were like, just wait. And Mark was just like on the phone with her until like 8 p.m. And then once her kids were in bed, she came for like the last 3 hours and she's
perfect,
amazing. But yeah, he was my doula. But yeah, no, I think because he had all of that information and had the experience the first time around when I was like, I'd already been talking about it when I was pregnant with Cora. I was like, I think for number 2, I'm going to want, as long as everything goes well, I'm going to want to do it at home. And he was like, okay. And so when I got pregnant and like I started talking to midwives, I was like, I think I'm going to do this. Like, he was like, yeah, let's do it. He was very supportive and, as you said, along for the ride.
Yeah. That's classic. That's classic Mark Sherwood right there.
Extended family was different. I
was going to say, how about for the rest of your family?
My family is like I don't think they're going to question what I do. I think because like I come in with like this sort of, at least with my own parents, like authoritative stance. And my mom had all 3 of us unmedicated in the hospital and very straightforward births and pretty fast. So I think it runs in our family of us being like good candidates for this. And she was like, I get it. You could do it. There's like a term for it that not you, but another OB told me, maybe Brittany, women who like come to the hospital with like 5 minutes to spare.
Precipitous deliveries.
But not, they aren't like Kira, our friend Kira has precipitous deliveries where she's literally in labor for like 4 minutes. But I'm talking about women who like labor at home, basically have an at home, go to the hospital, have the baby. And then once they have the baby,
stop and drop.
That was my mother
Yeah.
3 times through.
Yeah.
Like the hospital would be like, you cannot leave. And she's like, I'm fine. Bye. And so when I told her, when I was like, I'm going to do this at home, she was like, makes complete sense. I'm trying to remember. And if this feels so funny having this conversation about my in-laws on a podcast, but I don't know if we told Mark's parents because I knew they would not I knew they would not be comfortable with it. And I don't want to say we lied, but we sort of withheld information. I didn't feel that guilty doing it because I technically was engaging an OBGYN and midwives up through like 24 weeks of pregnancy. And when you deliver at home with midwives, you are still like, I was registered at CPMC or what's it called? Sutter in Oakland, like my closest hospital. Yeah. I was registered at the hospital. Like technically you are on both paths. So I didn't feel like, I was like, I'm just going to wait until this all unfolds to share our birth story is kind of how I did it. They were not happy with that information once they found out that we had Franny at home. And
even though everything went well and she like,
I mean,
wow, interesting.
People have very different like medical perspectives, right? And Mark's parents are very like trusting of medical authorities. And I'm not saying I'm not, but I was like, there is more, like there are benefits to both. And particularly you have to kind of break it down to like an individualized experience. And for me, my profile, I felt that my benefits at home outweighed my benefits at the hospital. And I still feel that way, If I had different like pre-existing conditions or risks in my pregnancy, of course, totally different. But for somebody like me, midwives gave me like the care that I needed, probably more than a doctor could have, because a doctor in a hospital setting is focused on higher risk pregnancies, as they should be. For me, my midwives gave me 110% of their attention because I, like the rest of their clients, present in a very straightforward way.
Yeah.
But they, we haven't really had that conversation, but I know they don't love it. So I don't know what we'll do. Like as of now, we hope to have a third child, and if all goes the same, I hope to have that child at home. How we will share or not share that information to family members is to be determined. So,
and maybe you don't share, and maybe the share is like the birth announcement, and they just are content with that mom and baby are safe, because that's truly
that's
to
all
me as an OB that's my only endpoint.
Yes.
Safe mom, safe baby.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into the nitty gritty of that home birth experience.
Yeah. I guess the way I think about it is like the differences in all of this. So, both pregnancies very similar, like no complications, slightly anemic third trimester. But I kind of explained with Cora, like once I hit 40 weeks, they're like, okay, stress testing, induction talk. With Franny, with my plan for an at-home delivery, my midwives, like I was like, are you guys going to start talking to me about like, I'm going to have to go get induced at the hospital? And they're like, no. They're like, no, they're like, how long did you go on your first one? And I was like, I was induced at 41 and a half weeks. They're like, this baby's not coming anytime before 41 weeks. And we are not worried about it in the least. And I was like, what? And so it was just like,
so different.
Of course, they get to come from a place of like the women that they deliver, don't have complications in that way. So like, I'm playing your devil's advocate for you basically. And like, I recognized that in the moment. I was like, okay, like I get it. And they're like, yeah, we're not worried at all. Please don't stress. And appointments became more frequent towards the end. And so they were monitoring me and Franny, who we didn't know was Franny at the time. Both like girls, we let the sex be a surprise.
Oh, I forgot about that.
But it was just like a totally different experience. Like I went and saw them. I did this with Cora, but I did this again. I did acupuncture as I got towards the end of both my pregnancies. I think that did help to like kick labor into gear. They were very supportive of that. My midwives kind of like gave me a referral and everything, but there was never any like talk about we're worried that this baby is going to like, with Cora, I had such this fear of getting induced with Cora. And I think part of that was put on me by like doctors being like, time's ticking. And my midwife's like, never whatsoever. And they do this throughout, but like towards the end, they kind of gear up or like ramp up their communications and reminders of like, here's how you call us, text us, reach us. Like, so like, when am I supposed to reach out to my midwives once I'm going into labor? But I fully intended, like, I was like, I knew the last one was 41 weeks. They're not worried. They think it's going to go a while. I was doing acupuncture. I hit 41 weeks. She still hadn't come. Or maybe I was like just a couple of days shy, but I still wasn't feeling anything. And with second kids, a lot of times people feel like earlier signs of labor. Like with the first, you feel nothing, but like the second, it's more common to feel like Braxton
like the prodromal
Hicks
labor,
or prodromal labor. And I wasn't feeling any of that. So I was getting a little bit like, oh no, like they're not worried, but I'm worried because I really want to have this at home birth, but like you can't if you go too late, like and they're like, we're not worried, you're going to be fine. And then I must have been just around 41 weeks, and Mark, Cora, and I'd been going on a ton of walks, doing everything I could to get into gear. I was fully ready to take castor oil as like my own form of at-home induction if I needed to. They were like, don't do it yet. You're only 41 weeks. It's fine. And it's so funny. It's just like, they're like, you're only 41 weeks. Whereas like anywhere else in the world, it's like, what's going on? But anyway, Mark, Cora, and I were going to go to San Francisco. It was like, we woke up that morning. I don't know if it was the weekend or Mark was like not working as much because we knew baby was coming soon. It didn't feel like enough, but it must've been like kind of irregular contractions. Something started enough for me to say to Mark that morning, like, this would have been April 20th. Yeah. I was like, I don't know if we should go all the way to San Francisco. Cause like, he's like, what, are you like in labor? And I was like, no. And he's like, are you? And I was like, I'm good. Like, I was like, I don't feel great sitting in this car right now, but like, let's not go all the way to San Francisco. So we very strangely went to just Treasure Island, which is like, halfway there. But I was like, this is fine. We will make it back at home sooner if need be. This is like 10 a.m. or so, but it was very irregular. So like I was feeling something then, but it kind of stopped. Yeah. And we went through like the rest of the day and everything was fine. Nothing else gave me a signal of anything to come except for that entire pregnancy. I had been the one to like pick up Cora and place her in her crib that night. I was like, I don't think I can do it. Just like the physical act of it felt like too much. My belly felt too big or I felt too tired. Yeah. So that night was the first night my entire pregnancy where I was like, Mark, you have to put Cora in bed. Yeah. And then we're getting ready to go to bed and we go to bed late. We still go to bed late. So like, we're like going to sleep at like midnight or whatever. And like, we're in bed, he's asleep. I'm like falling asleep. So it's sometime around after midnight. And I feel like what feels like a rubber band snap in my abdomen. And I didn't feel that with Cora. So I didn't know that it was potentially my water breaking. At the time, I was just like, that's a weird feeling. And I remember turning to Mark and I'm lying in bed and I'm like, Mark, and he's like, what? He's like, I'm trying to sleep. And I'm like, something happened in me. And I tried to explain the feeling. And I was like, and I'm just nervous to like get up and walk to the bathroom on my own. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, it just feels like I can't, like, I was like I couldn't verbalize it, but I think what I was thinking was like, if I step up, is something gonna like gush out of me or like what's happening? And he was like, oh my gosh. So he like humors me, walks me to the toilet. I sit there and he's like, what is happening? And I was like, already, I'm obviously like, I didn't feel a gush. Yeah. I don't know if it was my water breaking. Later on, we were like, that's probably what it was. Maybe it was like slow trickling, who knows? But so I'm sitting on the toilet and I am like feeling intense pressure already. And Mark looks at me sleepily and he's like, you're in labor. And I was like, no, there's zero chance I'm in labor. Like this, I was just going to sleep 15 minutes ago. I'm not in labor. I'm fine. And he was like, you're in labor, but I'm going to try to go get some sleep. Like, let me know if this gets like crazier. So he literally goes back to bed. I'm sitting on the toilet and being like, I didn't feel like what felt like contractions yet. I just was like, what is happening? Like something was building. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take a bath. So I like go over, get in the bath, and I am in the bath and things start out like fine. And I'm kind of just like, and then like probably by like 1 a.m. or even earlier. So maybe it's only been like 30 minutes. I'm like, Mark. And he's like, comes in and I was like, I'm not in labor, but like, can you just watch me and like tell me what you see? And he like took photo and video and like later and showed me. And like, at the moment I'm fine, but then I start doing my like, and I did this with Cora, like very guttural, very like animalistic, like, like I'm obviously like, and he starts like timing it. And unbeknownst to me, like I kind of like coming in and out of consciousness. He's like, he's called our midwives and they're on speaker listening and they're like, and I'm like, I'm not in labor. And then they listen to me like do my breathing and they're like, okay, we're coming over. Like already, it is only like this started at like 12:15 and it's like 1 a.m. And so like, they're already coming over. And then later I look at the photos and I'm like on 4 knees in the bathtub, just like rocking and moaning. And every like 5 minutes being like, I'm not in labor. And Mark's like, okay. Like the whole time I kept saying, I'm not in labor. And I was like deeply in labor.
Why were you denying the fact that you're in labor?
I think
you thought it just felt so different than it was with
like
Cora?
Cora's was like this Cora's like for first labor was super fast, all things considered.
It was.
But it was very like a linear graph, like very textbook of like, I never felt like people ask me, did you feel pain? And in Cora's, no, it was intense, but I was in control of that intensity the whole time. So it just was like a wave that I could ride easily. With Franny, it happened so fast that I was like white knuckling through it. I was like, oh my gosh. And I think I was just in denial that it could be that fast and that strong, that quickly.
Yeah.
And I think it felt almost so much that like, I was like, this isn't labor. Cause I couldn't even like feel a contraction. It just felt like like constantly, like I didn't feel ups and downs. I just felt like my body was being like compressed on all sides over and over and over. Yeah. I think I was just like in denial because of how intense it was. And it was crazy.
Yeah.
And so I remember like, so the way that it works is like you have my midwives, there's 2 in a team. They're amazing. East Bay midwives. One of them will come and first, and then the second will come shortly after, kind of depending on how long things are going. My labor was so fast with Franny that both were there pretty quickly. But I remember Amanda arrived first and then Jeannie came later. And they were just like, it was amazing once they like were there. Not that Mark isn't great, but this was a super intense feeling that I think I was a little bit like, I felt much more comfortable kind of relinquishing control once they were there. I moved from the bathtub and I was standing in the shower for a long time. And that was just like, my whole body was like shuddering. And that was probably around like 2 to 3. And I think I was already in transition. And that's when you're like coming to, like your dilation's going from like 7 to 10 centimeters. And for me, and I think most people, that's like the most intense time of labor.
Yeah.
That is when you're just like, I'm watching my body from down here. I feel everything and I see what's happening to it. And it is crazy. And it just sort of felt like there's like some movie or TV show, but it's sort of like you're like and then you're like your body's like vibrating and then calm, vibrating, but it was like constant. And so I'm like standing in the shower, and I was very happy that both the midwives were there then. And I remember particularly Amanda just like she just like carried me through each contraction, like squeezing my hips together, holding like my lower back. Cause that really, really helps with contraction intensity. And like, so with each one, she would just like, ooh. And because Mark was trying to, and I was like, dude, you got to go way harder. Like it needs to feel like you are breaking my body for this to work right now. And then he like got the hang of it. And it just progressed really quickly. Then by like 2:45, 3, I was like, oh, like, I was like, I think I have to like, I was like, I don't think this is happening too fast. Like, I don't know how far along I am, but like, I gotta go. I have to move out of the shower. And they were like, just very calm, never any conversation around like checking me or anything. They were like, let's move to the bed. Let's move to the bed. They just like knew from like how I was acting that I was probably ready to push. I moved to the bed because they were like, will you be more comfortable there? And I was like, sure. And I think I was like lying on my side, and I just remember they were like, okay, when you're ready, like your baby's ready to come. And I was like, are you going to like check? Like, cause like I just had my only point of comparison was with Cora, and they were like, Melinda coming in being like, well, has anyone checked her? Is she ready to push? Like, I remember that being in my head, and they're like, we don't need to check. Like, you're so obviously like a baby is about to come out of you. Like, we will see once you're ready to go. And so like they were there, and I think I don't know how long I pushed for with Franny, probably like 7 minutes. I don't know. It was very fast.
Yeah.
She was born. Mark stayed by me. He didn't catch her, but I was lying on the bed. I think I was side lying. They delivered Franny. We discovered she was a girl, like this, surprise for us. It was crazy. I was like, holy shit. Like with Cora, I remember having this feeling of like, yes, I did it. Like unmedicated. I fought them off. And with Franny, it was like an even bigger thing of like, oh my God, I just had a baby at home. Like, it's just, I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I was like, it's another girl.
Yeah. Aww.
And it was just like, like,
oh, you're going to make me cry. I was going to say, I can imagine just a pure elation. Oh.
Yeah. I don't know. There's just like something, you're like in your bedroom and like, there's like soft lighting, and it's just like your husband and like my older daughter's like literally on the other side of my bedroom. And I had these two women who had like carried me through this for like the past 10 months who like really knew me. It's just like this very intimate moment. And to like have a baby, it's like, it's incredible. I feel like so blessed that I could do that. And yeah, it's like, it was amazing.
Yeah. So beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you epitomize the ideal birth experience. I hear your story again as someone who supports births in the hospital. And I'm like, I wish we can give everyone a semblance of this experience. And I also respectively understand why people choose to do home births. And if it's a safe option, I obviously support that.
Yeah.
There's a security and a stability that home provides. But maybe lets your body like relinquish things and lets your body kind of ease into it. And you also have this story where you like Cora, even though she was asleep, like she was there too, right? Like your family was all there at that moment Franny arrived.
Yeah. It's pretty incredible.
I only hear good things, but part of my question is always to ask, like, was there anything that you felt like didn't go well?
No, it was amazing. It was a very like, it's so funny. Like I feel like both of my births, and I don't know if other women feel this way, but like are similar. They're like, they mirror the personality of the child. So like Cora's, although it was like, but I was in a hospital and I think I ultimately came to prefer delivering at home. Cora was like a textbook delivery. Like I said, I was able to like ride the wave and I was in control the whole time. And that is Cora. She is a rule follower. She is a people pleaser. She is just like your consummate older daughter. And like, she just, like birth 101, Cora, check. Franny was a very Franny birth of like, I am going to barrel my way into this and like blow your, like you thought you had everything under control. Well, guess what? Boom. I'm going to drop a bomb on this situation. And that was her. So like everything went well. It was super intense, like super intense. And Franny remained that way. Like it was crazy. Like, so she came at like 3:17 a.m. or 3:27. I can't remember. Then like did not sleep. And like Mark and I are like, holy and she just like, she within the first few days, you could tell she was not going to be like Cora looking back was an easy baby Franny, it was insane. She wasn't going to sleep. Yeah. I, for the first 72 hours, I don't think I slept because I was holding her. She would not let me put her down. For the next 6 months, she wouldn't let me sleep past like 4 to 5 a.m. unless I was holding her. She had colic. She had it all. And it was just it's so funny. Like they are, the personality of a person within like 4 minutes, basically.
Based on the, so no. And how much that correlates with their birth experience. No. It's like the first couple hours in the world. Yeah. And I can only imagine for kiddo number 3, because it's actually a wild card with number 3. We've talked about this. I was just talking about it with somebody who was like, well, third kid will just fall out of you. And I was like, actually, that's not the way it goes. Your second delivery is statistically faster or shorter, I should say. But a third could go either way. So I can't wait. That's a little nerve wracking. I mean, I still want to hopefully we can even have, I guarantee I'm not pregnant. So hopefully we're so lucky to have 2 healthy children. Like, I don't want to like diminish that. So who's to say we can even get pregnant? But we would love to have a third child. We'll see what happens. Yeah. But I am a little nervous because it's like the third is a wild card. So I'm like, oh geez, like what does that mean in terms of labor? But yeah. Well, we'll see how this podcast goes, but I'm gonna have you back for the third. It's gonna be a great story. I can't wait. It's gonna be great. I think I know the answer, but would you do this all over again? Would you do home birth again? Yes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Is there anything that you would have changed about your experience for, say, baby number 3? I don't think so. I think like the big questions for us right now. So as you know, and podcast listeners will find out, like we had both girls in the Bay Area. Cora was at UCSF in San Francisco. Franny, we were at our house in Oakland. Currently, we live in Brooklyn, New York, but ultimately we plan to move back to California. We thought we were going to do that sooner than what we probably are going to do now. So if things go according to plan, it's very likely I have this baby here in New York. Yeah. Again, I'm not pregnant. I shouldn't talk about it this way, but which you and I have talked about a lot, because if anything, that actually pushes me, like I'm more
hopeful that I can have a home birth and that everything's okay, because I do not want to deliver in a hospital in New York, just from like kind of the stories I've heard. Like they do not feel as patient centric. Yeah. So like, I really don't want to be put in that position. And I hope that I have a 0 complications pregnancy and can deliver at home. Yeah. It's particularly if I'm doing it in New York. So for me, there's nothing I would change. It's just kind of a bigger question of like finding resources that like all of my resources are in California. And now I'm sort of like, I have to find like, you know, we live in Brooklyn. Like we live in a place where like there is enough, like lack of a better word, privilege, where people are able to decide to have a kid at home and there are midwives serving that need. So I know that I'll be able to find a team that I like. It's just kind of like, it's a little strange starting from scratch, and it would have been nice. And who knows, we'll see if this changes. And cause I'm not pregnant yet. Maybe it'll take us a long time to get pregnant. It would have been so nice to like go back to like the women that I worked with for Franny's birth. Cause like, that's so magical. But we may have to find like a new team if we're still in New York. So that's like kind of the only consideration now.
Well, I can imagine when I think about networks, I hope that there's probably a relatively tight knit home birth midwife network, and so maybe your Bay Area team can make recommendations. And there are a lot of people New York as well. There's a lot of people who have had like doulas or midwives, or I don't know if you've got an interesting team for you to talk to for your podcast. Have you heard of ULA midwifery? OULA? Oh yeah, I have heard of that.
I think it's only in New York. And I want to say it's kind of addressing that concern that I had of like the hospitals here being a little too interventionist, for, you know, if that's the right word. But so basically they only work with hospitals. So it's not for people who want to have a at-home birth, but it's for women. And I've had friends who have done this. Logan McClure, who we went to school with, she just did this. We talked to her. But you go to ULA and you work with a midwife there who is like able to deliver at your hospital network. So it's like you're getting that midwifery care that's more in line with like an at-home birth, but they're going to deliver your baby in a hospital, which I don't know much about it, but that seems pretty cool. Yeah. It sounds like something in the middle, where if you don't necessarily have the opportunity, or maybe you opt out of doing a home birth, you at least can have that intimate connection with a midwife team. And my midwives in Oakland did that too. But it's like a much smaller network, but they offer services for hospital deliveries as well. But it's, you know how it is. It's like this, I think midwives at ULA are able to actually like deliver the baby. Whereas my midwives at East Bay midwives, I don't think they can deliver the baby in the hospital in California. It's like once you've transferred care to a hospital, like a nurse practitioner or hospital midwife or OB is delivering the baby, but they got to be like present at the birth, and like, and that's valuable in and of itself, of being like, hey, we've handled the care up until now. Like we're going to be present here. But you know what I mean? Like it'd be, I wish there was a more seamless, basically, ability to to handle both. You know, I think that's like a whole other conversation, but part of the reason like I wanted to do an at-home birth is because I love that midwifery care. And it's just like, once you have it, it seems silly to me that they like can't come into the hospital and deliver my baby if like I needed to be transferred to the hospital. Do you know what I mean? It just feels so unnecessarily separate. And I know other countries do it differently. And I feel like I have to do more research and reading there, but it feels like we should aspire to a model where it's a more blended operation. Yeah. I mean, this isn't ever a plug for where I currently work, but what you're describing is what we would call like a collaborative care model, which is what we have, where you can still have midwifery care in the clinic setting, but those same midwives are the ones who deliver you in the hospital. Although the difference is there's something to be said about knowing who your delivery provider is. And I think that's something that's really special, that oftentimes bigger healthcare systems that like I'm employed by, we can't necessarily offer that. But I think midwifery care, and we're going to have episodes specifically related to that. I think that is some, we just had so much to talk about. It's been so wonderful. Does that mean that Franny's arisen from her slumber? Yeah, I think she never slumbered is the problem. So that's the issue. Franny gonna stay Franny. Exactly. Okay. So really, as we kind of close out, yes or no, would you recommend a home birth to others? Hi, honey. Oh, thank you, sweetie. Okay. Thank you, sweetie. I'll be right there. Thanks, sweetie. I love it. Thank you. Okay. This is the note. Yeah, I'm keeping it. Okay. I'll be right. Okay. I can keep it until I die. Thank you. I just got a bracelet.
I love it. He's got a bracelet too. So I'll just say the question again, just for recording. Sorry. Would you recommend home births to others? Yes or no?
Yes. Oh yeah. I think there's such a misconception around it for so many reasons. And like we touched upon that earlier, but like kind of just like ignorance around. There's this assumption that like for anybody, it is better to deliver in a hospital. I can just give like a few examples of like why that's not true. But like for me, somebody with like a zero complications pregnancy, like I received more one-on-one attention before, during, and after my pregnancy than I would have in a hospital setting. And if that isn't like the definition of like more thorough care, I don't know what is, right?
Yeah.
That's like my profile of a patient, right? Like zero complications, like a textbook sort of pregnancy. So if you fall in line with that, there is a reason to do that. Because I think that like at the end of the day, like people have different goals. And of course, it's a healthy mom, healthy baby. But sometimes a hospital is operating under, there's different competing factors here. And I think like and I was never like this because mine were much more textbook, but likelihood of having a cesarean or likelihood of tearing or likelihood of being pushed like certain drugs that I didn't want, like all of those are higher in a hospital setting. And like just talking to, for example, explaining it to my in-laws where their assumption is like, definitely you and the health of your baby is going to be a better outcome at a hospital. It's like, actually, that's not true. I got the care I needed at home and I didn't run the risk of being, provided or told to have interventions that I didn't need and could have frankly affected my health in the long run. So I think that's like kind of the big picture misconception and like lack of a better word, ignorance around it. But then smaller issues too. People are like, well, isn't it messy? Like what's going on in your house? Like, isn't that more inconvenient? And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like they provided all the supplies. They, like they were shipped to my house. They came over and made sure that I had them. They toured my house multiple times before coming. They made my bed with special protective equipment before I gave birth. They removed that, washed my bed, put new sheets on it, and made me food after I had my baby. Like, so like, big levels and even smaller level. Like I would love to like dispel those myths and be like, you don't know what you're talking about. And like, yes, definitely have a home birth if you are primed to do so. Midwives and at-home birthing teams will tell you that from the start. So like, there's no concern of like recommending it to somebody who's not suited for it because they won't take you on if you're not, which again, I feel so lucky that I didn't have any like pre-existing conditions or risks that, barred me from it.
Okay, as we close out, what would be your final piece of advice to women who are considering a home birth experience?
I would say this to like anybody, to like just at home, hospital, but at home, yes, of course. But like, and we've talked about this a lot, but like my biggest message to women in general, but also those who are setting out to like have children, like please educate yourselves, empower yourselves, and like do the reading and do the research, like ask the right questions, like do not hand over the reins in this one experience. I see that like far too often. I know that I come from a place of privilege and education and where it's like easier for me to do so. And I love what you're doing. And I hope it's going to make it possible for women who are not in that space. But for my peers who are in the same space as me, do not like hand over the reins. Like you are educated, strong women. Like you wouldn't do it in any other setting. Don't do it in this one. This is like the biggest thing in your life thus far. Like make informed decisions. Like you are completely capable of doing it. And like everybody should do that. Like hands down.
Yeah. So well said. Stephanie, as you know, because you've alluded to, we've had these conversations a lot. You were probably one of my many inspirations to doing this podcast because every time I've talked to you, I'm like, I need to get our conversations out there. I'm kidding you not. I'm not just saying that. I love engaging you in this way. So I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you for continuing to bother me and get me on there. Backstory for those listening is like, I can't respond to email for the life of me, but we made it happen. And I'm so happy. And I'm very happy that you're doing this. It is very important work.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much for listening to The Golden Hour, the podcast community where moms and moms-to-be can hear stories from other mothers and learn from top experts in pregnancy and postpartum care. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share with your friends so we can reach more people like you. You can visit goldenhour.fm for more information, resources, and all other episodes. If you have any requests, questions, or suggestions for future episodes, please email me at hello@goldenhour.fm or leave us a comment at goldenhour.fm on Instagram. Looking forward to seeing you in the next episode. Until then, stay golden.